And now we've got our final duet of the day. Please welcome Geoffrey Moore, author and advisor, and Laura Tyson, professor of global management at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, with Changing the Future.
They put me here.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So we're going to wrap this thing up. I want to take the privilege of having Laura here to. She, among other things, is on the Council of Jobs and Competitiveness. Now, I wanted to take some of the themes that Esther and John had just been articulating, particularly around threat narratives and optimism and whatnot. And the place I want to start this is, what do you do when you think things are just kind of going the wrong way? This can happen in a corporation, it can happen in a country, it can happen in any situation. And how do you think about intervening? And Laura had a very interesting experience earlier this week, which I wanted to share with all of us, about someone who was remarkably effective in that context over an extraordinary period of time. And maybe you could just share that.
So I had the privilege on Monday of meeting someone I'd heard about for many years, but had never met before. His name is Sir Fazle Abed. He is the founder of something called BRAC. BRAC is arguably the largest, most successful non-governmental agency for poverty reduction the world has ever seen. It has been around for 40 years.
In Bangladesh,
in
right?
Bangladesh. It has transformed thinking about development. You know, some of the modern thoughts about how economic development proceeds grow right out of BRAC. Now, this story is really interesting because first of all, I heard things like passion and long-term. When he was talking about his mission, he used those terms. His passion came from the fact that he was from Bangladesh, and when Bangladesh broke off as an independent country from Pakistan, he went to build a nation. So passion for the nation. Passion for the most impoverished people in the nation. His view was that the success of the nation depended upon going to the very poorest in a sustained way and in a multifaceted way. So again, the story is one of progression, not just microfinance, which everyone probably knows about in this room, but microfinance and creating for-profit companies that would provide jobs for the people who receive the microfinance. So, for example, you get microfinance to own a cow. How are you going to sell the milk? You have to start a dairy. The dairy is started with the help of BRAC. But then you realize you have to educate the population. The defining mission of BRAC is basically to give everyone the opportunity to fully realize their potential. So what do you have to do there? It isn't health or education, it's health and education. It isn't education and health alone, it's education, health, and economic opportunity. It's legal rights. It's education throughout the whole trajectory of education. I was struck by a couple of, just basic facts I'll throw out there because they show how significant the achievement has been. So 40 years, estimates anywhere from 110 to 127 million poor people in some of the most complicated environments of the world. The second nation that BRAC has operated in was Afghanistan. Okay, this is not an easy place to try to make progress. Another thing I was very struck by, and this is where I'll stop, we all in this room, I've been in education all my life. Many of you are working in the field of education to use technology to develop new tools that are as good as a personal tutor. Those are really exciting things, and he talked about that at the end. But he started 40 years ago. So he started with one-room classrooms, one teacher, 5 years, get kids to read. He succeeded with that. He had statistics, which shows the percentage of students who had reading skills and what happened over time. But then he said, I found that adolescents dropped out. They learned to read and then they dropped out. So then I had to go to the secondary school. And then I had to go to a university. And then I had to go to, and now he's very much interested in the online learning capabilities that can be brought to bear in the population. So long-term passion, really tough problems. It was very inspiring. So I thought, as an agent of change, this person is a massive success in fundamentally changing the lives of hundreds of millions of people.
So my wish is that why wouldn't that be our agenda individually? Because one of the interesting things Laura just said was what Sir Fazley?
Fazley. He calls himself Sir Fazley. His
Okay,
last
Sir
name is
Fazley.
Abed.
Okay,
Sir
so
Fazley.
what he kept doing was he said, well, then I had to go. Well, then I had to go. So it wasn't a program. We weren't doing this at scale through the internet. This was the personal energy of the individual. So how did he scale that? I mean, what is your sense as you listen to that narrative? Did you get any sense of how he scaled it? Or
he scaled it in a couple of ways. One is, this is very much started as on-the-ground, door-to-door, mobilizing local community leaders to be part of the movement, the mission. So he, in every community, he had people working with his organization to do things like get the kids to school, keep them in school, get vaccinations done, get mothers to use saline solution to stop childhood diarrhea. That was all very much individual to individual. But he also then realized, well, I've got to build institutions. So I thought it was really, he was building for-profit institutions like dairy farms or seed, programs, companies that sell seeds to Brock recipients, but also sell them internationally. So he was doing business development.
right.
And then he was doing things like, okay, I'll start with a one-room schoolhouse, but gee, I think I actually need a university. All through this period, because it was business-based, he kept emphasizing the fact that he wanted to rely on business earnings to sustain his effort, not
Right.
government
So you don't have to do
support.
fundraising. You don't have the corruption of that.
He doesn't.
Oops, is Laura's mic not working?
Yeah, it fell off.
Oh, okay, thank you. If you could kind of
Yes, please.
take care of him. Well, see, this is what happens when you're hip. If you're old man, you put it here, but if you're hip, you put it over your ear, and it can be hard.
All right, I won't move
How about if I switch?
I won't move my head.
Maybe it'd
How's
be easier
that?
if we switch chairs and you could look at me that way. I'll lean forward.
So he is actually, he certainly has done lots of fundraising, but he never wanted to depend on that, nor did he want to depend upon government support. So I think that's a very important part of the sustainability
So
argument.
to me, the inherent entrepreneurism at every moment was
Yes.
to confront the change and act on the change as opposed to either resist or resent.
One other thing that came up in the panel before, real important, but again, this is a group of people who I think understand this very well, is willingness to fail. He talked about things he had done that hadn't worked. And he actually Brock is also famous around the world for being one of the first NGOs that actually evaluates their programs and tosses out programs that don't work. So basically you say, all right, I think this is the way to stop childhood diarrhea. You try it that way, it doesn't work. It turns out that they trained all these women, but then the women didn't use the saline solution. Why not? Okay, we find out that it's not working, we go in and figure out what to do next. So there's very much a kind of evaluation, measurement of effectiveness, willingness to change. But through all of this, an entirely long-term vision. I mean, he was talking about, I expect to get results on the education, the college education effort in 2050, 2060. He's way, that would be, he said, I'm not going to be here anymore, but that's all right.
So that's another piece of something that struck me about this story. John and Esther were talking about the passion of exploration, but this isn't about him.
No.
This is
Not about
all of his entrepreneurship is coming from being in service to something outside of himself, and therefore when the change comes, he can immediately size up whether it's meaningful or not relative to his own personal ambitions, but relative to the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's much easier to act in the world if you're not thinking about yourself. And this ability to be there. Well, so now as you look, it is a great story. It's a very inspiring story.
It's a very inspiring story.
It is. Now, I want to start sort of teasing out where at what point you say, well, okay, but how would that be different if we're confronting some of the trajectories in our society that we're talking about right now? Mm-hmm. You're involved with a bunch of them in terms of job creation. Where do where do you sort of take the lessons and where do you start separating and say, I think I'm going to do something different, either because I'm not him or because it doesn't fit anymore?
Well, of course, one of the things that the focus he has on development is to empower the individual to realize their potential. There are two forms of empowerment that are basic to that story in Bangladesh, and they're basic to the story in the US. One is the development of the human potential, and that is education. And the other actually is the access to finance. Because even in the US, where we pride ourselves when our capital markets aren't broken, on having the very best, deepest, broadest capital markets in the world, everyone understands that for many, many startups, particularly startups that are not going to grow into a major game company or a major cell phone company or a major next technological breakthrough company, but they're going to be startups that affect the lives of millions of people. Getting access to the funding is a huge problem. So actually, I think you go back to the basics here. How do you create opportunity for everyone to realize their potential? It's education across the board. I mean, he's actually now gotten interested, by the way, in early childhood education. So he feels like, okay, I've done primary, I've helped people get through secondary, I've developed a university, I can see some of the kids who went to the primary school now going to universities all around the world. Now let me think about early childhood.
I want to take you back. I want to take you back to someplace. So back to the U.S. Back to finance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So microfinance, very exciting story. Has its pluses and its minuses.
Yes.
Now let's think startup is. I want to start up I want to clean carpets and drapes in my neighborhood. I want to start up a business. I'm not a Silicon Valley. I'm not going to go to a VC.
Right.
But I need to buy some equipment. I need to start a business. So let's talk about the financial structure that we're looking at in this country right now. Why is that so hard to do, and what could we do to re-engineer that system? Why is it hard for me to get that loan?
I think the reason you always hear for why it's hard to do is these are small loans. There's very little collateral. It is very expensive to understand the risk of the borrower. It's just not cost effective to make the loan. I mean, one of the reasons that microfinance loans are so expensive is because it's very costly to make them. Mm-hmm. And they're expensive, but they're not expensive relative to maybe to the money changer, but they're still very expensive. So in the US, you still have the dominant method for people starting small business is their own savings, their friends' savings, their credit card. And of course, one of the things that is almost certainly holding back small business formation in the United States right now is that individuals have less savings, less wealth. They don't want to take out or cannot take out the same kind of borrowing on their credit card as they once could. Right. So the access to capital that was the normal route, which was problematic, is actually contracted. So,
okay, and one of the things I think, by the way, here, we listened to the gentleman from, I've forgotten the company, but Saffo's colleague, talking about big data. In the world of big data, we can actually solve for a lot of these problems.
Exactly.
More David House is a venture company I hang out with. We happen to have one investment in this area, but there are many of them which say, look, in this world, you can actually analyze credit risk at the micro level incredibly efficiently, and it's kind of inexcusable not to. But again, I think it's got to be an entrepreneurial mode. One of the things I'm taking away from Sir Fazley is I think policy can help set the context, but entrepreneurs actually create the context and drive it. And in that context, by the way, back just one last, I want to stay on America, but one last thing on the Bangladesh. Did he have to confront a lot of political resistance and overcome a lot of political resistance to what he was doing?
Yes, particularly as he became more successful. I think particularly in the area of think about schooling and school, teachers and how teachers should be trained and what are the requirements for entry and staying in schools. That's the one he mentioned as the most problematic. In areas like health, what he felt is the government wasn't trying to solve the problem, so they were happy for him to go in and try to solve the problem. They didn't feel that, but where the government was providing a service, education, then you get the kind of
the challenge,
yeah,
and it was our friends in Chicago are discovering this.
Yeah,
week.
well, that's
Whatever.
right. That's right.
Okay, well, I want to take it now to move it to so a couple more trajectories, and I will throw it open. But a couple more trajectories where I say, man, it feels like we're on the wrong trajectory. I wonder what we could be doing about it. So the outsourcing movement that we started a couple of decades ago and became so scalable through the internet has had a huge impact on the planet, I think, for very good. The rise of China, the rise of India. I mean, it's had wonderful, wonderful foreign aid impact. But it's been kind of hard on our society.
Yes.
And I think there's a feeling, and for a while we were very cavalier about, oh yeah, outsource the low-tech, manufacturing jobs. We'll do all the high-tech service jobs and it'll be great. And I think for the elite in Silicon Valley, that works just fine. But for a huge swath of the American citizenry, it doesn't work very well at all. And it's this decade's been a very bad deal. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety about job creation for the middle. And I know you're on this council, and I'm just curious, any thoughts you can share about policy and where you think this might be going?
Well, it's very tough. I want to say that although the U.S. has led the world in outsourcing, it is also the case that issue of jobs in the middle disappearing for reasons of outsourcing and or technology, and sometimes it's the same thing. That's a problem which has confronted and continues to confront all developed economies.
Yes.
So the U.S. has had the greatest polarization, the greatest erosion of the middle and twisting of the income distribution, so you have very high returns at the end, and then you have low-income jobs that are being created. They've slowed down during this recession, but if you think about things like any kind of personal service, those personal service jobs have increased.
They're very hard to do in China.
They're very hard to do
Getting
in
your hair
China.
cut every week
Actually,
to go over there.
Actually, one of the more,
very hard.
I oftentimes think I'm going to write a book about, this is a very funny thing to say, but about nail ladies who take a really negative rap. In this campaign, there was this whole thing about, do women who do your nails understand? Women who do your nails in this society, I don't know if you go and talk to them, a lot of them are immigrants and they're sending their kids to college and university.
That's right.
Basically, there is a trajectory. Okay, you can start with a personal service. And we saw that actually in the discussion, I think, from Julian Castro,
yes.
mayor of, yes, right. So it's a very hard problem. When we talked about it at the Jobs Council, first of all, a little bit of optimism. There is some evidence of a reshoring move in the United States. It's a little bit because of the changing energy cost environment in the United States, partly driven by the gas shale revolution. The U.S. has continued to have pretty strong productivity growth. The dollar has weakened over the last decade. So when you actually look at the cost advantage of outsourcing versus doing the work at home, the great advantage abroad has been declining.
And let's call it offshoring, because outsourcing I could still do to another company.
Exactly.
Yeah, offshoring.
It is really offshoring.
Yeah, okay.
Reshoring, I think is just is a better term than inshoring.
I think that's right.
Anyway.
Okay, fair enough. Yes.
So we did talk about that, and we talked about what could be done to enhance that inshoring trend. Now, there are things that governments can do. I don't know if you heard this just this week, but I think it's actually good, and I've been lobbying for it. California has reinstituted a trade and foreign investment capability in its Go Biz center under Jerry Brown. Governors and mayors around the country are actually doing a lot to encourage investment
in their community,
by domestic companies. I know actually that Rahm Emanuel got Google to set up something in Chicago.
Yep.
I mean, just as an example. I mean, you go out there and you sell your place, and you sell your place by talent development, by giving a good location, by doing some clusters effects. So we talked about that. as something that governments can do. We talked about what businesses can do with community colleges and talent development, so having much more tighter links between a business that's interested in locating in a particular place and talent development in that place.
Okay.
Right. So those are the kinds of things.
Okay, and that gets me actually to the third and last one I wanted to sort of hit back and forth with Laura, and that's education. And let me do a little bit of my issue here.
Sure.
I'm concerned that first of all, I think that America does, and I'm thinking particularly now of higher education. I was an English professor at one point.
Yes.
Laura's teaches at Haas at Berkeley. I think that America does higher education for the elite better than anybody in the world. I think for the middle of the curriculum, you can probably get as good or better education in many other places. But for the elite, it's just amazing. And I think the entire elite sends all their children to America for that reason. My anxiety is that we're pricing it out of the market. I don't know what the cost of a college education now is, but I can tell you economically it's a bad deal. Mm-hmm. If you borrowed the money to get the education, you probably aren't going to be able to pay it back. That is a horrible, horrible indictment to me. And I guess the challenge I want to put out, and I'd love to get, if anybody's in the policy world dealing with this, is in any other industry other than healthcare, in any other industry, we would say, fire all the leaders and hire somebody that can cost reduce and get this function to work properly. Not to reduce the quality of education, because I would argue in every other industry, quality gets better as we become more productive. But to hear a university professor and college president after college president refuse to take accountability for the lack of productivity improvement and therefore the increasing cost drives me crazy. And so anyway, I don't know if you have any views on that or whatever, but I feel better. So I got to say off my chest.
Well, I think we're at the beginning. When I was dean at Haas more than a decade ago, I remember I had this wonderful opportunity to run this new economy forum in Silicon Valley, and John Doerr and John Chambers helped me run it, and I would frequently go down to visit them both. And of course, at the time, this was the beginning of serious thought that we were going to have online education, a pervasive game changer in higher education. It's just taken longer than John Chambers thought back in 1998. I think he thought, okay, by 2003, we'd have the transformation, all right? I do think we shouldn't underestimate that there's all kinds of things going on now.
Okay.
So from Singularity, I was part of the MIT board that decided to put all of the MIT course materials online. Yep. And that was an early move. No resources going to MIT at all, no degrees, no fees, no nothing.
Just do
and
it.
People use that. The number of hits, the number of courses that are sort of the material that's absorbed all around the world. So that's one example. But I think, we have now dueling for-profit higher education institutions. We have all online that complements in person.
We had SalCon here last year. It was an award, the Khan
I actually
Academy.
think we're at the beginning, but it's now moving fast. We heard a lot about change goes fast. I think we're now at a tipping point. It can now move fast.
So if we can I'm just hoping we can cost reduce the system. I mean, to me, that's the painful. I hate to see these articles about
here's what you should think. I think you should think about this as there are different forms of education. I personally don't think, I agree with you. You look at some of the cost lines of these institutions. Take the elite institutions that we all know about. Their model is a highly personal, highly service-intensive, highly support very expensive faculty who are names in their field model. That's what it is. They're not interested in expanding the number of students.
That's right.
They're interested in the quality of a very particular form of education. And I think that's going to stay around. And it's going to be high price.
But they have alumni that will help fund it.
And they have alumni that will help fund it.
Yeah, I think it's the middle. It's that I want to go down one to where, and it's not that there's a part of education that's not irreducibly complex. So you cannot say I'm going to do it all online. That doesn't work. But there's got to be a better mix that frees up more time for less expensive, so I can leverage the expensive resource better, as opposed to,
I think that's right. I completely agree with you, and I think this is an area where the technology will really help. So the grand, one of the things that we also talked about in the Jobs Council, so the administration has tried to motivate a lot of its science and technology effort around the theme of grand challenges. And their argument is if you have a grand challenge, you can do a number of things. You can get interdisciplinary research going. You can encourage collaborations with industry. You can encourage the public to support science and technology because you're solving a grand challenge. Esther mentioned the human genome. So the estimate is that, think about it. Think about a decade ago when people were mapping the human genome. Well, so really, why? Why is the government doing this? The estimate is that for every dollar the government put in, they've generated $140 of possible business.
Yep.
I mean, these returns to these kinds of projects over a long period of time are huge, but how do you motivate? So you say the grand challenge is to map the human genome. The grand challenge, of course, Neil Armstrong just died, was to put a man on the moon. That was a grand challenge.
So stay with this because it gets to this thing that John and Esther were talking about, opportunity narratives. So the grand challenge is going to be an opportunity narrative.
Exactly.
But it's got to be told. So when we talk about putting a man on the moon, we always say John Kennedy. Because you can't just say, no, actually it was J. Walter Thompson that ran an ad on put a man on the moon, and that's what changed the world, right? So and it's back to Sarfazla again. So I'm thinking about the personal, charismatic leadership. Do you see, I think the anxiety in this campaign is that, and maybe you have to get through the campaign before this story can actually get told, because maybe it has to be told by an installed leader as opposed to a campaigning leader.
Yeah,
but these narratives have to get told in ways that are compelling.
I think that's probably right, because if you think about, let's think about a grand challenge, the clean energy grand challenge, which is a grand challenge of the administration. And then think about all the politics around Solyndra. And you just know there's no way to talk about the clean energy grand challenge right now. That would not be a good thing to do. So there's Americans have this anxiety about if the government defines a grand challenge to solve a major social or global challenge, then is it not making industrial policy? Is it not picking winners and losers? How close do you get to the problem before you've left basic research and gotten into influencing business outcomes? So it's very complicated in our society to do. We've been able to do it best around, we did it in space, and around health. We're actually, because people accept the notion that basic research is part of solving the health problem. But when you get to something like clean energy, it's more complicated. But think about a grand challenge in education, making, and I know there are people in this room who work on this, a tablet as effective as a personal tutor. Yeah. That is a grand challenge, and to make the tablet interactive with the student, so that I'm looking right at the person who's passionate about this, and I think you heard of it from him earlier today. Yeah. But so the technology, the interaction, you're getting learning on both sides. That's a grand challenge. That actually is something that can motivate. Again, what does it do? It motivates business. It motivates government to spend on science and technology support. It motivates the public imagination to get involved and to apply this. So I think grand challenges is a good way to think about.
I think it's an incredible way to think about it. I think narratives need narrators.
Okay.
And I think part of the ask of a conference like this is, in the current system with the electoral politics, it's hard probably for the most senior politicians to be narrators right now because the narratives are so compromised by the political rhetoric. But there's no excuse for every one of us not to be a narrator for the thing that we are most passionate about, to kind of close on John's thing.
So just because there's been, the last session also talked a lot about politics, and I just want to say, just like Sir Fazley was one of the most inspiring things I heard in the last 6 months. One of the most depressing things I heard in the last 6 months was Thomas Mann and Norm Orenstein. They have a book called It's Even Worse Than You Think.
Oh, thanks. I was just hoping to get that book.
That is the title of the book. And it is about the fact that the divisions right now in the Congress are so deep that it really is very, very difficult to get anything done. Much deeper, and in a non-parliamentary system like we have, those divisions can be stalemate.
Yeah,
Just means stalemate. In a parliamentary system, one side would get in, they would try their thing, and if people thought it worked, they would say, okay, well, you will be, or you'd kick you out. We have a system that can stalemate or block. And I do think it is got to be to the citizens, and we do see a good news thing here is that the popularity of the Congress now is below 20%.
It's
I mean,
low.
people
It's
really
low.
are
It's
fed
low.
up.
It's low.
But what they need to do is get rid of some of the people who are there, because we are responsible for who's there, too.
Well,
but it is very divided right now, and it is therefore very hard to move anything
in either direction.
forward.
So I know we're out of time, so I'm going to take my last 2 minutes to riff on what Laura just said. So I spent a lot of time looking at Darwinism. It's part of one of the ways I look at markets is I try to think about them in Darwinistic terms. And we all know Darwin talking about natural selection and survival of the fittest. But there's the other half of the Darwinian model, which is sexual selection, which is you survive, but could you get a mate and procreate so that you can pass on your genes? So that model of natural selection and sexual selection has come up in two other contexts for me that I think are enlightening. One is in venture capital, where it turns out the ability to raise money and the ability to make money are actually not necessarily correlated. And so the raising money is a form of sexual selection. It's a way of I can get funded. And creating a great business is a form of natural selection. If you can't, you will get naturally selected out of the system. And what's interesting about that system is that eventually natural selection and selection will correct for each other. So you can fool some of the people some of the time, but eventually that system corrects. When we come to the electoral system, particularly to the Congress with 2-year terms, we've reached a place where there is no natural selection, there is only sexual selection, meaning the entire purpose of being a congressperson is to get elected. And the day after you get elected, you start posturing for your next election, and nothing can happen in 2 years that will allow natural selection to actually occur, which is where you're getting, to me, you're getting to a terrifying state. So our job as the electorate is to somehow get natural selection back into the system one way or another, because we're not governing. We're posturing, we're not governing. And whether we govern from the right or the left, if we governed, we would be okay. But we're not governing, and it's pretty darn scary. So with that happy thought, I think I will turn it back over to Avery. And thank Laura Tyson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey and Laura. I have to say, both the session before and this session, there's a quote from Winston Churchill, which is, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that matters." So that, a little bit more inspirational than what you guys had. So want to also thank the curatorial team that helped put this together and brought you together for this day. It's Dave Blakely from IDEO, Michael Moon of the Moon Agency, Paul Saffo of Discern Analytics, of course, Karen Tucker and a fantastic staff at the Churchill Club. And I'm part of the team, but you don't have to cheer for me. It was just fun for me to be here with you all. And there's a kind of a closing quote. There's T.E. Lawrence said, all men dream, but not equally. Most men dream at night and wake in the morning to find that their dreams were but vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they dream with their eyes open and work to make their dreams real. So I wish that for all of you, my dreamers of the day. Thank you.